if you're at Daniel chapter 3, we'll go ahead and read it. And if you're not familiar, that's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were in charge of the Babylonian section out there, and they had a lot of responsibility. But we'll go ahead and read what trial that they went through, and then, like I say, we'll get into the message. Nebuchadnezzar was the king, made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its width was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. The king Nebuchadnezzar sent word together the satraps and the administrators, governors and counselors and treasurers and judges and magistrates and all the officials of the province to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, and the magistrates, and all the officials of the province gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that you, at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, the psaltery, and symphony, with all of its music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that the king Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace." So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre in the symphony, with all kinds of music, all people, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, psaltery, and symphony, with all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast in the midst of the fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you should not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego finally get to speak in this chapter, answered to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known, you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because he had actually given them responsibility over the Babylon area. So they were in a position of leadership there. So he spoke. And then he said, his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, and their turbans, and their other garments, and they were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." "Look," he answered, "I see 4 men walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the form of the fourth is like the Son of God." Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God," his tone had kind of changed a little bit there, come out here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire, and the satraps, administrators, governors, and kings and counselors gathered together, and they saw these men on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair on their head was not singed, nor was their garments affected by the smell of the fire was not on them. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted him, and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded the bodies, and they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language who speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to the province of Babylon. So, they received a promotion through it. The title of today's message is when it's all on the trust when it's all on the line. So in the story you can kind of see, and we'll focus a fair amount on compromise today too. So, compromise is around us, all around us today. The idols of our age tempt us with false promises. There's a lot of things out there that will take up our time. Power, money type issues will get there. If we may feel like we're being left out. If we stand by our convictions, we may find ourselves alone. Meaning, if we may have convictions, spiritual convictions, that may have us standing, apart from the pack, if you will. In the heart of it, the Bible teaches us that the world holds out empty promises that can never fill our souls. And when we go with the currents of this world, we may find immediate gratification, but the pleasures will be fleeting, and we'll be left with nothing but empty hands and broken hearts. So there's a finite aspect of it as we're living in the world, but we're talking about the infinite. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is a powerful reminder that conviction trumps compromise every time. If we compromise, if we're convicted, it'll trump that compromise. When Nebuchadnezzar warned of the punishment for not worshiping a man-made image, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego boldly claimed that their faith in God would not be coerced into bowing to any other. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "If you don't worship, what was the consequences of them not worshiping that God? They'll be thrown into the blaze. And who is the God who can rescue you from my power?" They soon found out. These men of God did not compromise. Their faithful men answered, if the God we serve exists, He can rescue us from the furnace, and He can rescue us from the power of you. But even if He does not rescue us, we want you to know that we will not serve your God or worship the gold statue you set up. And God, did just as they knew that He would. They emerged completely untouched from that furnace, and the complete protection, the comprehensiveness of God's protection, protected them. It says in Isaiah, "You will not be scorched when you walk through the fire, and the flame will not burn you." And as we were worshiping today, there was a lot of references to going through the fire in life. So as we were going through the worship today, it's kind of Becca and I never had a conversation about the words that she was going to be or the songs that she was going to be singing today. But as I was listening to the words, going through fiery trials. Perhaps the burning desire to turn the things of this world is a fire that is crackling in your heart today. Is our God not able to strengthen you to resist compromise? We look at that. Our God is our God not able to strengthen you to resist compromise? Is our God not able to empower you to resist the temptations that so easily ensnare us? I know I'm not the only one that, we see things, we experience things. Our God is powerful enough to help us, strengthen us in compromise if we follow Him. And one of the most classic, the Lord's Prayer, there's a little section there. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. And the reward of faithfulness is infinitely better than the fleeting satisfaction that comes from yielding to this world's temptations. Meditate on that. The reward of faithfulness is infinitely better than fleeing satisfaction that comes from yielding to the world's temptations. And then as we continue on with the study, we're going to go through some excuses that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego could have made. And secondly, the confidence that they possessed, as we read through that. And thirdly, the determination at which they arrived. And as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego held a position of authority within the group, so they were kind of under the microscope, so they had a lot of scrutiny on them, and they reason I say that, because they didn't bow down to that image, they had a microscope on them, so they got called out on it, a little more easily. So what did it do to Nebuchadnezzar? It incensed him. It got him mad, and he got very violently mad, and he didn't believe that anyone could defy his authority. He put the alternatives plainly before them. Here's the golden image. You three Jews are to bow down before it. If you do not, there is the burning fiery furnace. Into it you shall be cast at once. And what excuses might they have had? We're going to go through 10 of them. It's and this is the first one. It's perfectly useless for us to resist. Why would they? If you're, and we make up these same type of excuses as we go through our life. As we encounter challenges. Obviously, this is a little bit bigger challenge. They're threatened with going into the fiery furnace, but it's for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to say it's perfectly useless for us to exist. They could say we can't even contend with this man. If we submit, we do it unwillingly and surely being coerced into it. Why would we want to throw our lives away? And therefore we will bow our heads as the rest of the multitude have done, and worship the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. So that could have been the first excuse that they used. And then the second excuse that they might have used was, we're in a strange land. They weren't from that area. It's kind of the old adage, when in Babylon, do as the Babylonians do. Everybody was worshiping the image of the king. So they weren't home in Judea. They wouldn't have even thought of something like that. If we were at home, we would obey that law. Haven't we known many to say they are Christians at home, act differently when they are away from home? And kind of, go into the ones that we've seen on the television. When in Vegas, do what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Where you have that type of illustration. I think we all have that etched in our mind. But I've been to Vegas a few times. Used to live out in California. What I enjoyed the most going there was I enjoyed the people watching, because it was so entertaining to watch the different things that went on. But that's besides the point. And another thing that they might say is, God the God of this island and not the God of the continent. So do we make God smaller because we're do we conform to things because we're in a certain environment? God is here all throughout the world. He's not just he's not just because you're in that certain spot. Has he ever given us permission to do abroad what we may not do at home? So, just things to think about. And then, we're the third excuse is we're in office. They were governors or had an authority in that area. So have we ever seen where a person gets elected to a board or a council, and when he gets to sit on that board, he seems to have left out his honesty at home. He becomes a different person. I remember I've sat in some union negotiations as part of my job before, and it was a select group of people that came in that represented the shop personnel, and I remember distinctly that the people that I knew, they were the same people that came in off the shop floor and negotiated their side of the contract, but they were different people when they were in that position that they held. So, and I walked back out there, and I still treated them the same, but it was a different type of relationship because I had never seen that. And what it basically revolved around is the almighty dollar. They all had their own little niche that they wanted to protect, so they were different. So they thought that they were special, and it was noticeable during the course of the negotiations. And so that in this case, had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had their conscience vanished. It is true that they were bound to obey the lawful orders of the king, but whether to be right to obey men rather than God, their conscience could easily enough judge, so they never made that excuse. So, and they might have said, we must not throw away our chances. So as we're, this was a trial for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and because they were prospering, they were kind of moving up, in stature within where they were. And among the dangers to Christian men or Christian people is the greatest, perhaps, is accumulation of wealth. Do we put God in the rearview mirror, or Jesus in the rearview mirror, as we attain wealth? I know it's been one of my personal prayers is that if I do, make me humble at all times, even if I do acquire, He's kept me down. Don't worry, but I haven't had to worry about it too much. But it's I don't want to be rich in the world and not rich in God. So that's and kind of re-encourage when a man becomes a Christian, the blessings of his life are his too. And as the world begins to rise, does he leave his old position behind him? Far too often, with increasing riches, he forgets God who gave him it all. We need to make sure we keep God in focus at all times. There is, unless the Spirit of God abides in His people, we might indeed see our faith commit spiritual suicide. So we want to make sure, as the Lord's leading in our life, we don't want to, we want to reap the benefits of this world, but we also don't want to put Him in the rearview mirror, and we want to keep Him in the focus. So it's, when you get right down to it, it's probably more necessary for people to pray when they're in a prosperous position. I also had the opportunity to be in the prison ministry when I was out in California. It was interesting. The reason I bring that up in this section, it was interesting that I was in prison ministry for about 4 years when I was out there, and you would see people, and the yard that I would go into was always probation offenders. So, and as I mentioned, I was in there for 4 years. So some people would be in there for they'd serve their probation time, and then they would get back out, and then I would see them again, and hey, what happened? What happened? And you would have a lot of people coming in there, but did they apply? They were spiritual, or whatever the right word might be. when they got back into prison, they got back into the Bible. But when they were out in the world, they fell back into their old practices. And we're guilty of the same thing, and maybe not in the way that we're going to prison, as frequently as maybe they did. But do we apply what we're learning, what we need to be, in the Bible studying, each day? Many a man who was an out-and-out Christian when he was lower down in life has, when prosperous, become much too great a gentleman to associate with those who were his honored brethren before. Sometimes leadership is how you get in a leadership position, is how you use that. If you rise in the world, you have no more right to do wrong than you had when you were down in the world. The main takeaway here is do right. Do right. It's as simple as that. Do right. And when we're prevented, and as I mentioned, compromise. Do we compromise, or do we do right? We must never do wrong or plead our position in society or our prosperity in worldly things as a reason why we may do what others might not do. And then further, they might have had excused themselves because we are politically bound. And they were putting up this image was not altogether a religious act. It was symbolical. The image was intended to represent the power of Nebuchadnezzar, and bowing before it was therefore doing political homage to the great king. So they could have used the excuse, we're politically bound to do this. So, and then when you get into politics, then you start thinking about politics of today. Politics, people stick to your party through thick and thin. Right and wrong vanish once loyalty to your leader. That is the point. Never mind where he leads you. Follow him blindly. You are even told that you may do wrong because it's politically right. Doesn't make any sense. And how do we apply? I know Steve said this. I've heard it from many different pastors. How do you cast your vote? Which side of the political aisle goes along with your beliefs? Is that somebody that's willing to, do they stand for or against abortion? Those type of things. So, vote that. I would encourage you to vote that way. I'm not telling you how to vote. I would encourage you to vote, your biblical principles first and foremost. And I'm encouraging you to vote your biblical principles. Whoever shares those is more closely aligned in your biblical principles is the person to go with. And what it boiled down to, that these men never for a moment entertained the evil thought. It is true that politics were mixed up with this image, but whatever might be mixed up with it, they would not worship it. For God had said, "Thou shalt not bow thyself down to them nor serve them." So the sixth excuse of our 10 excuses, we are not called upon to reject our God. We are not called upon to reject our God. So as they came into that, there was lots of people worshiping this image. They weren't all called to reject their God. In their hearts, they might have make a mental reservation as they bowed. They might have whispered to one another and said it was a devil and not God. They could have kind of bowed to it, but kind of had some underlying message between them. But they didn't even do that. They didn't bow to the bow to the music. They could have had that excuse. Pay their respect to the king rather than to his image. They could have kind of politically gone along with it. If their conscience had been elastic, meaning that how far do we stretch our conscience out in order to come in line with the status quo, or do we stick to what is right? And then they also could have said, although they looked at his image, they did not worship it. So a lot of excuses they could have made it as they went along the way. Anything, in fact, will serve for an excuse when the heart is bent on compromise. So again, do we compromise, or do we we don't stretch the truth. It's very easy to find a hollow reason for false action. Temporal benefits is attached to it. Modern charity manufactures a multitude of excuses to cover sins. We see it on the news. I think we see things that we say that's not right. There's all kinds of examples where you just kind of see things coming out of people's mouth. You just go, that's not in line with what we're studying in the Bible. So it's interesting times. And then the seventh excuse that they might have had is, everybody else is doing it. Have we ever heard that one? Everybody else is doing it. And you think about what we're seeing on TV, the riots. How many people are, they're peacefully protesting, but they riot because they get caught up into the crowd. There were when everybody bowed. There were Jews there by the thousands. There were different people. There were fire worshipers. There were men who hated the worship of graven images, but they all bowed. They were men who had gods of their own, which they reverenced, but they all bowed before it. So even people in that crowd, they gave in. Nebuchadnezzar's God. Oh, I'm sorry. So better men than you have bowed, but you will not. It's full. It could be said it's foolish or folly to be singular, except when to be singular is to be right. So do you stand up for your convictions? Note that do not be aligned with evil. Don't allow that to enter in, and it is not being concentric with any kind of evil way. Though millions bowed, what had they to do with them? Do we have the ability to cultivate a brave personality? Do we, in the service of God, things can go by the counting of heads. You must follow the Lord's will whenever it leads you, whether you go alone or not. So, quote here: "Dare to be Daniel, dare to stand alone." So, be willing to stand alone. Eighth excuse they might have made: it's only for once, not for long. Such a trivial act cannot make any difference at all, or at any rate. It's not enough to be brave, not enough to brave the fiery furnace for. Why would you want to brave that fiery furnace? Let us treat the whole thing as a huge hoax. It would be ridiculous to throw away our lives for such a trifle incident. They mean to stand for God, but this is scarcely the right time. They will wait and choose a more worthy occasion when someone really heroic can be attempted. You can make all kinds of excuses in this situation. Even for a few minutes in a lifetime, would these three brave men deny their God? May their stubborn faith be ours. May their stubborn faith be ours. They did not bow to the pressures that were on them that day. And in the ninth excuse, we can do more good by living. Why would we put ourselves into this position? We can do more good by living than we can by being cast into the furnace. They have a position where they want to get their agenda out there, so they want to do more by living. So that might be an excuse why they shouldn't be thrown into the fiery furnace. How much more we might accomplish by not being thrown into the fiery furnace. They're put into a high office. There are many poor Jews who are captives. We can help them. All kinds of excuses as to why they can do more with it by living. They remain where their conscience tells them they ought not to be, because they say they are more useful than they would be if they went without the camp. This is doing evil. This is doing evil that is good may come and can never be tolerated by an enlightened conscience. If an act of sin would increase my usefulness tenfold, I have no right to do it. And if an act of righteousness would appear like to destroy my apparent usefulness, yet I am to do it. So going with the flow isn't necessarily the right thing to do, but when you know that you're doing the right thing, it is the right thing. I have an example when I was in the Marine Corps. I had a situation where I was in the color guard, and we used to go do when a former Marine or a Marine died, we would go and present colors there. And the event was fine. It was a great event. It was way down in Mississippi. I was stationed in Memphis at the time, and it was kind of the backwood, not backwoods, but it was a town in Mississippi, and there was a clique there, that you might say. And the Marines were coming in. We did our color guard, had the 21 gun salute, and it went all fine. But Marines being Marines, they gave us a case of whiskey and to distribute to us, because it was a thank you gift. And we were in a van. We were driving home, and the whiskey bottle started opening, and the driver was drinking, and it made me feel very, very uncomfortable, to say the least. I can honestly say I did not drink in that occasion, but it had a situation where there was a staff. I was an NCO, and I reported to a staff NCO in this occasion, and I really wrestled with what was the right thing to do. And ultimately what I did is I talked to my officer in charge and reported the situation. It was one of the most difficult things to do, because, as you know, there's I don't know if it's a code or whatever you want to say, but it's a hard thing to talk to somebody about a situation that could have been, it could have gone the exact opposite way, where 12 Marines died in a van crash that day, because the guy driving was drunk and overreacted to a situation that he couldn't react to properly because he was intoxicated. But I didn't go with the flow on that occasion. I have gone with the flow, but on that occasion I couldn't let that go. Nothing happened to the staff NCO in the long run, but he never encountered me and ever did anything negative to me. But from my standpoint, I thought I did what was right in that occasion. But it's interesting, there's the life experiences that you have along those lines. And then the 10th and final excuse is, really, this is more than can be expected of us. So, it's just too much for us. We contribute to the church to support the religion of God. We will be cheerfully, we cheerfully do everything that we can to support the church. But yield our lives in this horrible way to be cast in a burning fiery furnace is more than flesh and blood can bear. Why would we do that? And I'm talking, obviously from the standpoint of Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. Yes, and some of us could not answer that argument, for it is pressing upon ourselves. Remember what Jesus said to the multitudes who went with him. So remember what Jesus said. If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and his wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. So people are giving up quite a bit to follow Jesus. People are giving up quite a bit to follow Jesus. And when you do that, let it cost that it may. Let it cost what it may. I make no exception. I take all risk. I will follow Christ the Lamb wherever he goeth, even should I die while I'm following him. He does not come to that. He has not taken the position which Christ demands of us. So there's a narrow road that Christ demands of us in order to follow him. And that's what they did. What has to work in us in order to be able to do that? The Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit must work before we fully converted to the faith. We have to be filled with the Holy Spirit. God make me strong enough to apply it to ourselves. God make us strong enough so we can apply it to ourselves. We've reviewed all the excuses and that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego might have made. Second point we're going to make is the confidence in which they possessed. They had very definite, solid faith. Meaning we are not full of care as to how we answer you. And as we read the text, one of the comments that they made, we are not full of care how we answer you. They did not answer. They did answer very carefully, but they were not anxious about the answer. You notice that they said it very, very confidently how they said it. They knew what they were going to say. They did not deliberate. They did not hesitate. They said to Nebuchadnezzar, "We can answer you at once on that point." We are so calm, self-collected that they could talk to him, not as a king, but as a person, Nebuchadnezzar. When it came to life work, it was man to man. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to Nebuchadnezzar, they told him what they had no difficulty in answering him. Second point here is that they did not judge it theirs to answer at all. They didn't feel like they even had to answer that question. We will not answer you. It is not us to answer. Whose was it? This is an interesting point. They did the person. Who were they following? They were following God. It is not for us to answer you. There is another one that will do that. Who have they challenged in this situation? They have challenged God, and God shall make his own reply. And you know, I've heard this before. When I was out in California, when we were growing as a church, and it was growing rather largely. And you know, we didn't have the funds immediately to be able to expand the church. So I remember the pastor, said, "Not my problem. It's God's problem. How we're going to grow the church." And long story short is, we built a pretty good-sized sanctuary, and he would give us occasional updates as we didn't have a thermometer or anything like that. He refused to do that, but that church was paid for in, I don't know the exact timing of the paid for the church, but I know everything went up with that. Money was not a fretful issue in that case, but because who had the problem to grow that church? It wasn't the church. It was God's issue to grow that church, and He provided the funds to make that happen. So if we have that mentality, I will also often say that if somebody comes to me very fretful, it sounds like God has a problem that He needs to solve for you. So be in prayer about that, and God will answer that situation. The confidence of being right versus the consequences of being wrong. They threw the onus of this matter upon God Himself, being Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they had the faith to do that, and so may we in our walk. If you will do right, it is God's affair to see you through. So be in prayer when you make that step out. Only you do the right, and whenever it comes, it is no blame of yours. That must be left with God. And they avowed their faith in the omnipotent God. So omnipotent means present. Notice that they say, "Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace," knowing that if He chose, no mighty man of Babylon could ever throw them into the furnace. The furnace itself must die down and become cool as ice if God so wills it. They tell the tyrant to his face, enveloped as he was in the flame of wrath, that God can save them out of the fire. Their God was almighty, and they put their trust in Him. So where was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's trust? It was in God. They were sure they would be delivered. Whether they burned in the fire or not, if we die, we shall be out of your reach, but we may not die. We may live beyond your reach. But even if they do die, they will live beyond His reach. You have asked the question, who is that God that should deliver you out of the hands? And we answer you, our God will deliver us out of your hands, O king. So that's faith. And if any of you are greatly in a great difficulty or trouble, tempted to do wrong, even past to do it, and if you do what is right, it looks as if you will be great losers and great sufferers. Believe this, God can deliver you. So as we go through our trials, God is faithful to deliver us. He can help you bear it in a short time. He can turn your losses into gains, all your suffering into happiness, and He makes the worst things that can happen to you be the very best things that ever happened to you. So as we go through the trials, as we do go through trials, He is going to turn those things into happiness as we follow Him. Again, He will not leave you in times of difficulty. Paul says, we trust not in ourselves, but in God, which raises the dead, who delivered us from so great a death, and does deliver, in whom we trust that he will yet deliver us. And then the third point here is the determination of which they had arrived, that we will not serve thy gods nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. So the conditions, they did not pivot their loyalty to God upon their deliverance. They did not say, as some do, they did not say, as some do, I will serve God if it pays me to do so. I will serve God if he helps me in such and such a time. So that excuse could be heard. It was not conditional love. We'll surrender ourselves to his will, make idolaters of ourselves. Could not even and then they resolved that they would obey God at all cost. So first 2 points are, they did not pivot their loyalty to God upon their deliverance. So they weren't stating that they weren't going to be loyal. They didn't put conditions on what they said. It was not a conditional type situation. And then they resolved that they would obey God at all cost. And as we walk through, you cannot expect men to love God well enough to die for him. So might have been one who loved us well enough to die for us, and to die 1,000 deaths in one. So what did Christ? Christ died for us. If Christ died for us, we love him. We ought to love him as well. There's stories of martyrs that have died. As I was reading, there's a story of a martyr that he was going to be burned to death, and he knew that he was going to be burned to death the next day, and he had a stove in his cell, and because he was going to be burned to death, he was going to put his foot on the stove to see if he'd be burned by that stove, and sure enough, he got burned by that stove, because that stove, that situation there, served as him, kind of testing God. But in the event, the Lord did not call him to burn his foot on the stove. That wasn't that case. But when he went out to be burned his faith, the body, when they called him to give his whole body to the flames, then grace was given. So it's kind of, I don't know where the story comes from. I read it as I was going through the study. I don't know what the time frame, but obviously when they're burning martyrs. But it's kind of interesting that even God allowed him when he did it on his own, it was discomfort. But when he burned in God's, where he was supposed to reveal God, it was very God was revealed in him. There's also another story about a woman, a martyred woman who was going to be burned as well. And while she was giving birth to her child a few days beforehand, she had the normal birth pains, and somebody said to her while she was having the child, why did the pain occur at that time? And so and the people knew that she was going to be burned as a martyr, and she said, now you see the pains of nature which happen to a woman, and I have not patience enough to bear them. But by and by you shall see Christ and his members suffering, and you shall see what patience he will have and what patience he will give to me. It is recorded of her that she seemed as if she had no pain at all when she yielded herself up to Christ. So different circumstances when we try to do it in and of ourselves versus in and of Christ. And do not judge by what you are today, what you could be if you were called into trouble. Grace would be given to you. I have no doubt that many of the most timid of those who truly love would be the very bravest, while some of you think they would be brave. They would be very first to start back. So, some of us, kind of have an image. We have an image of ourselves in a situation where we'd be called to to what happened with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We kind of say, what if we were in there? We all pray that that never happens to us, obviously, where we're thrown into a fiery furnace or anything like that. That's not what we're saying, but you may boastfully say, I would jump in that furnace, or there might be somebody else that's very timid that might say, I'm not doing it. But when the rubber meets the road, it could be the most timid person that's more likely to follow in the steps than the bravest. So it's kind of interesting thought. But there's something cruel about mocking. It does not break anybody's bones, So, and being laughed at, there's also, society, being laughed at, it's you're the brunt of a joke, type of thing. Roll with it. Don't let it take you down to a point where you're not able to function as a Christian. People will. We were talking before service. We were being a little sarcastic, a little bit before service and with each other. But it wasn't meant in a bad way. So, but if it's something that you can show that you could roll with the situation, you show a Christian witness. So, and generally, do right, fear nothing, and God will help you. So, as we're going through this walk of life, we're to do right, fear nothing, and God will help you. And have a clear sense of divine presence. If a man feels that God is seeing him, he will not bow his knee to an idol, neither will he do evil, for God's eye is upon him. If he will endure as seeing him who is invisible, and through the floods of ungodly men lift themselves up, you remember the Lord who sits upon the throne and higher than they. The man who realizes God's presence is by that invisible companionship rendered him invincible. Greater is he that is for him than all that can be against him. For, this is a quote, for right is right, since God is God, and right the day must win. To doubt would be disloyal, to falter would be sin. And as we getting closer to the end, have a deep sense of divine law, for no other gods before him. So in this world, people wear crosses and crucifixes and things like that, but not saying, but no Virgin Mary, no cross, no crucifix, no picture, no image, no visible object is regarded with reverence. In other words, that you reverence or worship instead of God. Make sure you keep God as your focus, not the thing that you might be looking at. All this must be put away. That is clear enough, and therefore Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, feeling that God was near and knowing that God's law dared not to violate that law, but would sooner die. So they put their trust in him. They didn't put trust in worldly things. Above all, to keep us right, we must have mighty sense of divine love. If you love him, you will say, I will put an image of gold. If you love him, you will say, what? Put an image of gold in his place? Never. You're not going to view an image. Some of you, and we've all heard this, the cliche, let us eat, drink, and for tomorrow we die. You'll even hear some of that going on as we watch the news these days. They have kind of a flippant attitude. So, these three men influenced the city of Babylon and the whole Babylonian empire. They influenced the next age, and to the hour they influence the brave. They're brave. They stand for God in his eternal unity. Excuse me for a second. So one of the final points, these three men commanded the admiration of heaven and earth. Yes, but the Son of God did not think so. When he in heaven heard them speak, thus to King Nebuchadnezzar, he said, brave men, I will leave the throne of God in heaven and go and stand by their side. And visibly he descended. So as the situation was going on, God was witnessing the situation that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were going through. He came and stood with them as they went through that fiery furnace. So he came down from heaven to be with them. And that's the kind of faith that we need to acknowledge, that we have that God that's able to come down and stand with us and walk through our trials with us. It was the greatest walk they'd ever had on those burning coals. The four of them were walking together in sweet fellowship. Can you imagine that if you're in a fiery furnace like that you had when we have that relationship with God, that He is with us in that fiery furnace and walking side by side. There's trials that we go through that will require that kind of faith, that kind of commitment, and that they won the admiration and sympathy of the Son of God, who left heaven itself that He might come and stand with them through the furnace. So, what impression did it make? As we read through that scripture, Nebuchadnezzar started out very, very infuriated. He was in rage and was really upset. And then when he saw that there was a fourth person in there, how does his demeanor change? Demeanor changed quite significantly by experiencing the God. And what did he say as we kept on moving through there? He acknowledged that their God was the much more powerful God. His demeanor totally changed on that. Did he stay that way throughout the rest of the chapter or the rest of the book? No, but that's the way he was there. So he himself could not but stand there and was awestruck. He, being Nebuchadnezzar, admires these three heroes, and now today we all do the same. If we like to being able to, how Nebuchadnezzar, how the three Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked through that fiery furnace. In closing, if we would be servants of God, we must be believers in the Son of Jesus Christ. Come to trust Jesus Christ that you are saved, and that come to trust. When you are truly saved, you are to be saved from all hesitation about obedience to God. So all hesitation about obedience. So saved that henceforth God's law is your rule. And then with the holy law imperative upon you, you will go forth into the world and say, it's not mine to ask what others will do. It is mine to shape my course by them, not mine to inquire what will bring me the most profit, what will bring me the most honor. It is mine to look upon thee, my God, and ask, what should I have? What would you have me to do? So we're not to be looking at others. We're to be looking at what God would have us to do. I will do it at all costs. And I wonder how many of us of whom these words are addressed that have courage enough to do them, to come out on Christ's side. I do believe that many of us do not want an easy life, that they would rather have a hard time and a stern battle. We have brave spirits among us still, who like to lead the lonely hope and are not afraid. I challenge such to come and serve God fully and thoroughly, and they shall have a rough time, but they shall have glory. So it's not going to be an easy walking the Christian life, but it is. But as we go through the trials, we are going to have, we're going to have the time where the personal relationship with God is just totally blessed. Make a whole offering of yourself. So don't go in halfway, go in all the way. Christian body, soul, and spirit for Christ. These three men yielded their bodies, as we read in the 28th verse, and ask you that by the mercies of God that you present your bodies as a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is a reasonable service. Let the faith of your spirit carry your whole body with it in hearty obedience to God's command. Let this be true of you.